Since 1969, we have been living in a myth and in a lot of ways have been lied to about a really important topic that involves all of us, but especially those who are in the midst of addiction. I'm talking about grief and loss. And when Kübler-Ross came out with her book On Death and Dying in 1969, she set in motion something that she had even no concept that was going to take over the way that it has. In today's episode, I'm going to break down with you and talk about how the 5 stages of grief is actually a myth, that the creator of the stages even said this isn't what I meant, and what it means to mourn with those that mourn so that we can comfort those who stand in need of comfort. Welcome everybody to Returned to Honor. I'm going to start a new segment in a playlist where we're going to dive into how can we help those in need find comfort, support, and to truly follow the counsel to mourn with those that mourn and comfort those that stand in need of comfort and be saviors to those who are here around us. We really have an amazing opportunity when it comes to helping those around us or even ourselves trying to overcome addiction, trying to get ourselves onto staying on, to pick ourselves up when we stumble along that covenant path, and especially when it comes to grief and grieving. I recently had an amazing opportunity to speak at a ward in their 5th Sunday, something I absolutely love to do, and go in and talk about these ideas to adult groups, even adolescent, Sunday schools, and help them understand what's going on, whether it's this is what addiction is, how do we understand it, why do we get them, how do we get out of them, or as we did this last Sunday, what can you do either for yourself or especially for someone else who has found themselves trapped in this space of addiction and they're struggling and trying. Now, one of the things that is so vitally important is that we learn the proper way to grieve. And unfortunately, there has been a misconception and a breakdown since 1969 when Elisabeth Kübler-Ross wrote On Death and Dying and put into motion this stages idea. Now, just out of curiosity, I wanted to see what a web search would do. I don't know what Google would do. I use DuckDuckGo, and I just typed in grief and grieving. And obviously the top, grieving supports. But then it gave me this AI assistant. And even the AI assistant immediately lays down, after common sources of grief, the stages of grief. And Elisabeth Kübler-Ross and her 5 stages. Now, this is so ingrained in the collective psyche and is so repeated within circles that most of us can would think that we could, repeat it by memory. The problem is, and even Elisabeth Kübler-Ross, a few years later, and let me just jump to here and let me just show you 5 years, I guess, it was 5 years, 1974. After Kübler-Ross published and wrote On Death and Dying, she wrote a follow-up to that. And let me open it up. The 5 stages of grief. This is a quote from her, and this comes from the Kübler-Ross Foundation. Roll it up a little bit. The 5 stages of grief was initially introduced as the 5 stages of death in 1969. By 1974, Kübler-Ross publicly acknowledged in her second book, Questions and Answers on Death and Dying, that the stages were not meant to be linear. She asserted that several stages might occur simultaneously, be skipped, or not occur at all. But my question is, have any of you ever heard that idea? That we may not do a stage. We might do all the stages at once. Maybe we're going to jump straight to the end. They aren't linear, meaning that we bounce around sometimes and feel like a pinball in a pinball machine. This paragraph finishes, and again, I took this straight from the Elisabeth Kübler-Ross Foundation website. She believed that the concept of the 5 stages was merely a starting point for discussing the elements of the grief journey. Now, I think it's really important to also note that as it says here, and in the name of her original book on death and dying, these were the 5 stages of death, not grief and grieving. But as we so often do, we kind of generalize and then try to funnel it in and power it into everything that we can figure out how to put it into. And that's exactly what happened. Let me go back to that search that I did. So after the AI, assessment, and here's what we're finding as we scroll down from health at Stony Brook Medicine, EDU, understanding the stages of grief. But again, Kübler-Ross never meant for them to be stages of grief. Grief and Loss Counseling Idaho, so that's an agency that's done a good job getting themselves in here. Coping with Grief and Loss, Stages of Grief and How to Heal. The Cleveland Clinic, they don't necessarily bring it up here, but here in Psychology Today, we have this article, 9 Self-Care Strategies for Grief, which is great. Doesn't talk about stages. WebMD, though, Grieving and Stages of Grief. Harvard Health, 5 Stages of Grief. Coping with the Loss of a Loved One. Now, how is it that something that even the author didn't intend to become the foundation does? And this is exactly the same thing that I've talked about in other episodes when we start talking about addiction itself, that we get this entrenchment into something that gets brought onto the scene. So in 1959, when the American Medical Association said addiction is a disease, just like in 1969, when Kübler-Ross says there are 5 stages of grief, actually she said 5 stages of death, we lock onto it, we run with it, and until something knocks us out of our way, most of the time we don't even think about it. And that is exactly what's happened with grief and grieving. And it's a problem because when we think that there is this linear process of moving through the stages, that the grief event is going to happen, and then we're going to move into this point of denial. And then once we're done denying, because we can't, deny that it's happened, then we're going to get angry. And I had a client some years ago. She came to me and said, Brett, why am I angry? I've already done anger. I shouldn't be at that stage again. And the reality is, we are going to, as Kübler-Ross said, we're going to bounce around and we're going to move about as we feel we need to until we have moved through that process of grief, until we have reconciled and accepted all of it and come to a place where we're coping, we're understanding, and we've integrated it into our life. And so with that, we've got to look at what is going on and how do we truly do it, because we don't deny, go to anger, then all of a sudden bargain, and then we get depressed, and then we move into acceptance. It doesn't work that way. And the sooner we kind of get our head wrapped around that, the sooner it is that we're going to be able to help others as they are trying to process their addiction. Because one of the things I'm going to show you here shortly is that addiction and complicated grieving, or the bargaining process, go hand in hand with each other. And so if I want to mourn with someone who's mourning, but I don't understand it because I'm thinking, well, you've already done this stage, why don't you just move through it? Then I'm going to have a very difficult time helping somebody in their grief experience. So let's break it down and let's talk about how it is that we actually grieve. So I want to go first to a verse that I'm sure that we have heard many times, but it's something that I think is really important for us to remember and to come back to, and that is Isaiah 53, verse 3. He is despised and rejected of men, a man of sorrows, and acquainted with grief. Talking about the Savior, Isaiah writes that he is despised and rejected of men. Now, when we're thinking about loss and we're thinking about events, we're talking about what is the pain that might drive somebody into addiction. Have you ever been despised? Have you ever felt rejected? Yeah. And the Savior is a man of sorrows. He knows sorrow. He knows loss. He knows disappointment. And he is acquainted with grief. Now, I find that beautiful, because if I'm going to lean on the Savior and rely on the power of his atonement to bring me peace and to bring me joy and to bring me happiness, then I need to know that he truly knows and understands me. And one of the things I love about Isaiah 53 is that it does just that. He was despised and rejected of men. Well, how many times have we gone through life where we have been betrayed, we have felt abandoned, we felt rejected, we don't feel like anyone accepts us, and we're despised, and then we're left in our own sorrow. And so on this idea of health or healing and recovery and coming into a place where we're healthy and strong and on that covenant path and moving in every way possible to the Savior, to know that he has been on that path as well is one of the most important things that I think any of us, I would hope that we can lean on to that, knowing that he is there. But now let's move into verse 4, because this is such a beautiful thing. Surely he hath borne our griefs and carried our sorrows, yet we esteem him stricken, smitten of God, and afflicted. Jesus Christ truly has borne our griefs, and he has carried our sorrows. And in doing so, Jesus Christ then has opened up access to us that we can lay our sorrows at the feet of the cross. We do not have to carry it. In fact, yesterday I was talking with a client, and he was talking about his addiction and this work that we're doing to help him overcome. And he said, maybe this is just my cross to bear. And I thought, isn't that an interesting term, my cross to bear? And I'm going to go and do an episode on that, because there's a couple of really excellent conference talks using that term and what it really means. But there's also this idea that we are supposed to lay our burdens at the feet of the cross. So how long do I bear my burden? How long do I carry my cross before I'm able to lay it down at the feet of the one who has already borne my grief, who has already carried my sorrow? And when he says we are equally yoked, am I giving to him the sorrow that he can bear it, because he's already done it? And so with that, and with that in mind, knowing that Jesus Christ truly is able to bear our burdens because he already has, he's experienced it all with us, and that is why he can do all of this for us. How is it that we truly grieve if there aren't 5 clean, step-by-step linear stages? Even The Simpsons, there's a great episode. Look it up on YouTube. I don't want to, put it in here for copyright potential, but just look it up. Simpsons and 5 stages of grief, and it's quite comical. But keep in mind that this is not what Kübler-Ross meant. So, if that's the case, how do we grieve? And how do we mourn with those that mourn so that they can move themselves out of the grief and grieving space and actually integrate the pain into their life and come out of addiction? Because that's truly what it is to mourn with those that mourn. So let me jump back, and I want to show you the rest of this document. Opening with Grief and Loss, Complicated Grieving and Addiction is the title of this, something that I put together for a group I did some time ago. And then the 5 stages, like we talked about, was never meant to be linear. It was never meant to be a static 5 stages, as Kübler-Ross said. And let me come back to this real quick, because Kübler-Ross, she also talked about the fact that these are the 5 stages of death. She did her research, and all of her writing is based on her experience with people who were in a terminally ill state. And it was them coming to a place of acceptance that this is final, that I'm facing and accepting my mortality. Now, most of us, from a very early age, we begin to experience grief and loss, but we are not dying. And so what do we do with it? We're not coming to a place of acceptance where all of a sudden I can be, kind of relaxed and kind of kumbaya with the moment that, okay, my run is over. And that's what she talked about with this idea of acceptance, was that they were coming to a place where they had reconciled the fact that my time is done. Well, what we have to do is reconcile the fact that I now have this loss that I'm going to carry with me throughout the rest of my life, which is entirely different than coming to a place of reconciling that I am now going to be done. And so let's keep that in mind, because all of us then become, what I'm going to show you later, is a loss manager. Now I want to move through, because I don't want this to take forever, and it's already taken longer than I wanted, but the foundation to this is so very important as we understand what's going on. Several years ago, I worked with a model, and this pathway through grief kind of came forward. And I want to talk about this because what I've experienced is that this is such a cleaner, more accessible, and truer way to grieve. And I'm going to talk here in a minute about why we got bottlenecked and where it breaks down and where we can actually do the best help. So when a loss happens, let's just dive into this. I want to teach you this. There are expected losses and there are unexpected losses. All of us typically can expect that we're going to continue on. Our grandparents are going to die before we do, that even in most cases, our parents are going to pass away before we do. Most of us can come to that place of understanding that I'm going to have to deal with the loss of my career at one point. Retirement for a lot of people is a loss as much as it is gain of freedom. But then there are unexpected losses: sickness, auto accidents, being fired from a job, the ending of a relationship, a divorce that we thought everything was great. There are unexpected losses and there are expected losses. And one that isn't on here, but I want you to think about as well, is sometimes an unexpected loss can move into the realm of taken. Somebody exerted their agency on me and took something from me. Now that was absolutely unexpected, but it kind of goes to another layer. And I don't want to spend a ton of time there, but I think most of you know what I'm talking about and have experienced moments when someone has maybe come into your life, exerted their agency on you, comes through abuse, comes through, some form of harm done, and then we're left holding that. Now, immediately after, and this is something, if you want to say, like in the stages model, fine, because Kübler-Ross did say then we move into this denial. But this is a natural reactive process. We hear something that is so overwhelming. We hear something that is so incomprehensible that, of course, the very first thing we're going to do is deny it. We're going to protest. We're going to throw a little tantrum maybe. And there's going to be this emotional expression, this anger, this outburst, because we don't like what we hear. Now, years ago, when I was a senior in high school, my wrestling coach had become quite important to me. And my senior year, we had our spring break. A lot of things were coming to a close. We had just had the last choir tour I was going to go on. Wrestling season was over. We were in the home stretch for the end of our high school window of time. And we get back. I had just gotten home from the choir tour, and a friend of mine who lived through a pasture, and we could see each other's houses, must have been watching, I don't know, because I get in the house, I'm kind of setting things down, and the phone rings, and it's my friend Ryan. And Ryan calls, and he says, "Brett, Coach died." And I immediately protested. I'm like, "What are you talking about? That's the dumbest joke in the world. Why would you say something like that?" And I found myself having this rush of energy, started to come out with some tantrums, some anger, and I'm protesting against what he's telling me because it was so overwhelming that I couldn't accept it. I was in a place of denial. And now after that subsided, and reality set in and more information was gathered. And this is before internet, before texting. It was before, everybody all of a sudden knew everything instantly. But sure enough, he had been at home over spring break with family back in the Midwest and was on a jog with his sister. And he didn't tell any of us, he didn't tell anybody but immediate family that he had a heart issue. And that was the day that his heart decided to give up. And sure enough, he passed away. That was incredibly overwhelming. It was incredibly heartbreaking and difficult. And my initial first reaction was to deny. It was to protest. It was to push back in a tantrum and tell Ryan, "Why would you say that? That's the worst lie you could ever do. You know how important he was to me." But it was real. And we can stay in a place of denial as a form of bargaining, or at least we can try, for a very long time. And bargaining is where addiction begins. Denial is kind of a form of bargaining. If I don't accept this, it isn't real. If I do not let it in as a reality, it isn't true. Bargaining is full of those if, when, if only, because this, and we make all kinds of irrational, illogical statements. An example that I heard a long time ago, or maybe I created, I don't remember, but you go to the doctor and the doctor says, "Look, I got some bad news for you. You've lived a really rough life," and maybe it comes because of the experience I had, Ryan calling me about, my coach, but your heart is on the edge of collapse, and you're, one good day away from a major heart attack. And you immediately go into a place of denial and bargain. It says, if I get a second opinion, I'm going to get a better answer. Okay, I got the second opinion. He said the same thing. If from this day forward, I eat nothing but salads and I walk 5 miles every night, I'm going to change this, and they're both wrong. If I do this, then I can change the outcome. When this happens, the reality is going to shift, and it isn't going to be what they say it is. Because those guys were just general practice docs, they don't know what they're talking about. I need to go get a second opinion. Because those guys were trained by the medical association that's all about money, that's all about disease, symptoms and not actual cure, I'm going to go to a functional medicine doctor. I'm going to go, and we bargain and we put illogical hope on top of reality in an attempt to not have to accept that it was real, when in reality, It was absolutely real. And then we move into this place of bargaining that is either internalized or it's externalized. I'm going to act it out or I'm going to stuff it down. This externalized, internalized, acting out or stuffing form of bargaining, and the way that bargaining kind of shows itself, this is when we start to enter into that space where addictions are created. And it really looks like the person in the beginning, if I just put my head down, if I just go to work, if I just keep muscling through, everything's going to be okay, and I'm going to be able to deal with this, and I'm going to get through it eventually. Yes, it's hard, but I'm going to be able to do it. That is internalizing. Externalizing may in the beginning look like, you know what, this is tough, but let's just go on a vacation. Let's just, we need to get away. Or let's throw a really crazy wild wake and a celebration of life, because we don't want to have to look at the fact that it's really ugly and it's sad and it's awful. And there's nothing wrong with a celebration of life, but it is a way to externalize and have a party which kind of moves towards that place of mania. Or maybe we are so overwhelmed with this pressure, this emotion, that we explode and act out in rage, and it just spread everywhere. That is bargaining. And when it goes on long enough and is continued, and we get into this cycle of internalizing it to externalizing it to bargaining again and justifying, if I just do this, when that, if I can only that, and we're bouncing back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, and that chaos continues. If I just have another drink, I won't have to feel it, and I can sleep tonight. If I just take this pill, it gives me energy. If I just drink 20 more sodas, I'm going to be able to get out of this funk and have the energy to push through my day. And then we have the feeling of shame and judgment and internal, chaos that we go through. Okay, if I just stuff it down, if I just hold it in, if I just go a little bit longer, and we're trapped in this cycle. That is when addiction really starts to settle. And that's when the chaos of loss starts to impact in our life. Why does that happen? It happens because of this space right here in the middle. Right here in the middle is this, what I call the emotional abyss. And it is where all of our primary and our secondary emotions are full. To me, because when we're born, there's this emotional river that starts flowing through all of us. And it flows and it continues until the day that we die and we leave this life. Somewhere in the middle of that is this pool where it's all gathered. And maybe you've got, the flow and the current, and it's fresh, and it has joy, and it has happiness, and it has love, and it has acceptance, and it has all of these wonderful, joyful, clear water emotions. And then you got this marshy, swampy backwater. This slow-moving or backwards churning eddy that holds all of the grief, the sorrow, the heartache, the rejection, the negative, overwhelming emotions. And they just seem to sit there and molder. And it's mossy, and it's dank, and you step in it, and it reeks. And it is this emotional abyss that stops us from being able to progress to a place of coping and understanding, and ultimately acceptance of the loss, and the acceptance and integration into our life with a life with loss. Now, why is it? Why is it that we get stuck here? Now, I don't know about you, and I don't know about how you were brought up. And for the most part in my life, we were allowed to be emotional. But I'm going to venture to guess that probably about 80 to 90% of all of the clients that I've worked with over the years, they come with a heavy feeling of confusion, of embarrassment, and really a lack of knowledge of how to be emotional. And unfortunately, for a lot of them, they actually experience things, and maybe some of this is going to sound familiar to you. And if it does, I'm sorry. But we have to talk about this, and we have got to kind of put it out there. So many times people grew up in a home where they heard things like, quit crying or I'm going to give you something to cry about. What are you, a sissy? Suck it up. Deal with it. Man up. And anything like that, it takes us away from a true knowledge and understanding of what grief is and what sadness is and what sorrow is. And how can you learn emotional intelligence, and how can you learn any kind of emotional vocabulary if there was nobody in your life telling you and teaching you the words to be able to be emotional? And so most of the time what is going on is we experience the loss and all of the emotion starts flooding up and we're overwhelmed because we don't know what to do with it. We'd never developed the emotional vocabulary to even be able to put words to what it is that we're feeling. And then there's the shame and the conflict of, if I express this, if I feel this, if I let it known that I'm actually weak and I'm feeling this, oh my gosh, what kind of shame and judgment is that going to bring? And so out of fear, we stuff it, we internalize it, we mask it with joy, happiness, and overwhelming optimism. Because heaven forbid I should let you see that I'm actually hurting deeply. And so one of the things that we can do, and that is essential for us to do early on in our children's life, and if your kids are already gone, learn it yourself and begin to emulate this with them. You can teach this vocabulary early or late. It doesn't matter. But if you have grandkids, let them feel and teach them what these emotional words are. I find it really curious, that we numb and block these emotions and these feelings. But I want to go real quick. Let me jump over. In Galatians 5, verse 22 is a verse that we've heard many times, but I want you to think about this in terms of that emotional abyss. But the fruits of the Spirit, the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, long-suffering, gentleness, goodness, faith, meekness, temperance. Are those not emotions? The fruits of the Spirit are emotion. Love, joy, peace, long-suffering, gentleness, goodness, meekness. If I'm not being taught emotional vocabulary and how to recognize my emotions and how to sit with those emotions, how am I ever going to know how to understand the Spirit? If that is how the Spirit is going to speak to me and help me. And so it is vital that we learn emotional vocabulary, not only because the negative, but we have to be able to know and understand the positive. What happens, let me jump back here. What happens is because I don't know how to emote, and I'm afraid of all these negative emotions that are broiling out of this emotional abyss, places that I've been denied or I was never taught, or that are coming so rapidly that I don't know how to deal with them, then instead I'm going to deny my emotional experience and I'm going to bargain. If I just work harder, do the dishes, keep the house clean, go to work, do my job, go visit the kids more, go on a vacation, buy that car I always wanted, then I'll feel better. And I won't touch this. Well, one of the things that we have to do, and one of the ways, not even one of the ways, the way that we truly mourn with those that mourn is that I'm going to step into the abyss with you. I'm going to sit with you in your sadness, in your feeling betrayed, in your loss, in your sorrow. And I'm going to be sorrowful with you. One of the ways that we help someone through the abyss is to help them see what's really there. And we say things like, you look sad. When I feel the way it looks like you feel, I'm experiencing, and you give it a name. And we begin to identify and reflect what we see in them. We don't judge them. We don't put meaning or try to say, well, that makes a lot of sense because this, and this. We don't know. All we do is sit with them in it. And if you think about that emotional abyss as the pool or, an eddy in the flow of emotion, we sit on the bank and we put our feet in. And for a moment, we feel sad until we realize that we've been sad before. And then maybe we need to pull our feet out and we go back and we bargain a little bit. But I can go back in and I'm with you and you're holding me and you're helping me see betrayal and you're helping me see rejection. You're helping me sit, standing with one foot on sadness, with the other foot on joy and happiness and relief. My son asked me the other day, he said, I'm sorry about the loss of your friend. And a good friend of mine, somebody that I'd known since the MTC, somebody that I met in the MTC, and we went to the same mission together, and we traveled around the mission. It seemed like we were never companions, but I was in an area and he was in the neighboring area. And we moved around our mission like that much of the time. And we came home and he introduced me, through a friend to the woman who became my wife. My wife introduced him to her best friend for ages. And they got married and we got married. And, well, he passed away the first part of November. And my son said to me, I'm really sorry about your friend, Dad. How are you doing? And I said, you know what? I'm okay. One, it was a long ordeal. It had been coming for a while, so it was expected. Early on, there was loss, there was sadness, there was realization that this was coming. And as I processed that, and my son asked me, I realized that, I had been standing with one foot in the emotional abyss, but standing on this stepping stone of sadness and loss, while at the same time, a little bit of joy and relief, because the pain that he was in, he was diagnosed with cancer. And so there was relief and joy for him, while at the same time, sadness and emptiness for me. And we can do both at the same time. And when we recognize that, now all of a sudden the emotional abyss doesn't sound as scary. And we realize that, a term I learned years ago, actually I learned it on my mission, when you're in a mess, you've jumped head first, or you're ankle deep head first in a pile that you shouldn't be in. We don't have to jump head first, ankle deep into the abyss, or ankle deep head first. You get the idea. If we'd have stepped in by our feet, we'd only been ankle deep, but we dove in head first and we feel like we're drowning. And that's how most people think they need to step into there, and we don't. You step in one emotion at a time, and as each emotion shows itself, you can touch it and realize, oh, I've been sad, I've been hurt, I've been abandoned, I've been betrayed. Maybe I've never been rejected like this before, but I kind of know this feeling. And because I know it, I can manage it. And I'm so grateful that you're standing here with me, taking me with you, or coming with me as I go through this. But we don't yank them out. And we don't try to take away from them or tell them that they're doing it wrong or too much. Because who's to say what is the proper amount of crying or sadness or illogical statements? That's why let me go back here. That's why I have this parachute. Bargaining is very much like a parachute. If the loss event was the realization that my plane is about to crash and I better jump, and you grab a parachute and you start barreling to the ground, well, that emotional abyss is going to start getting closer and closer and closer really fast. And so you pull the parachute, and this canopy of bargaining slows you down. And all of the strings that are tying you to that canopy are the if I just, if only, because that, if they would have. And it's all of those illogically logical statements that are holding us from crashing deep into the emotional abyss and helping us land on the edge. And maybe we land on the side of acting out. Great. After things settled and I realized that Ryan wasn't lying, I disappeared. My mom had no idea where I was. I went on a run, and I'm not a runner. Never really liked running. But I had so much energy, so much rushing emotion, and the energy that was coming, I moved into that fight or flight side of the brain, and I ran, and I ran, and I ran until I got across town and up a hill, and I was at my girlfriend's house. And that's when I collapsed into a freeze, and I just became a puddle, and I was crying, and I was lost, and I was lonely because I couldn't deal with it, and I didn't know what to do. And all of this was so overwhelming that I was grateful that I had this parachute that helped me land so that then eventually I could move in step by step, emotion by emotion, and move through this emotional abyss until I come to a place of coping and understanding. Now, coping and understanding oftentimes looks a lot like internalizing or externalizing. I think today I'm just going to sit in the house. Maybe I'm going to watch a movie. Not because I'm afraid of what I'm feeling, but I need to watch a rom-com or a feel-good, happy movie or something that just makes me feel a little joy or love or something, and that'll help me. and we isolate. Not because I'm afraid, but because I need to feel. Or we call up our good friend and say, hey, I want to go on a road trip. You know, we used to always go to this place, and I'd like you to go with me. And we go out. Or I'm tired of being in. I'd like to go out. Do you want to go to a movie with me? Do you want to go to dinner? Do you want to go out and have some fun? But it's not from a place of avoidance of this. It's because we've moved through it. We can now do those activities because they help us feel what's in here. And that's the difference between coping and understanding and bargaining. The behaviors look a lot alike. But I'm not trying to numb anything. I'm not trying to externally express it because I don't know what to do with all of this. Now, I want you to keep in mind as well one other thing, and there's so much more that we could teach with this, but I want to bring this in. Notice these arrows and how they are all bidirectional. Now, I was telling this story one time about my wrestling coach years ago as I was teaching this concept, and it was all at the same time that my grandmother was passing away. And I told the story of my wrestling coach dying several times, and it had been years at that point. But immediately I was flooded with emotion. And I had to stop the class I was teaching. We went on a break for 10 minutes while I allowed that emotion to flow and could regain my ability to teach. And I came to an understanding that what I was actually feeling was the anticipated grief of my grandmother passing while I told the story of my coach. These arrows are fluid, and we move up and we move down, and we may be, being a loss manager with this life with loss for a long time. And then all of a sudden something happens and we're right back into the emotions. And that's okay. Because once we've learned to cope and we understand them, I don't have to be afraid and deny them through bargaining. And that's why it is so important that we learn emotional vocabulary, and it's why it's so important with our kids and our youth that we do not deny them the knowledge and understanding of how to cope and how to emote. Because if they don't, and they go through something so overwhelming, now they're going to be in such a place of emotional distress that maybe, as so many of my clients have talked about, they find themselves in a place of addiction because it helped them cope with emotions they had no idea how to deal with. And so mourning with those that mourn and comforting those that stand in need of comfort is the act of bringing the Savior and his atonement into their life because he's already carried it. He's already experienced it. We don't have to be afraid of it, and we shouldn't ever shame someone for having emotion, but we have to teach it. It's a learned skill, and it's a learned vocabulary, just like any other language. And the better we are at that language, the less impacting it is, and the less time we spend in a place of bargaining because we're now able to cope. And that is how we help someone who's trapped in that cycle of bargaining, internalizing, externalizing. If I just do this again, and oh my gosh, I did it again, I can't believe it, I'm going to just try harder, and now they're in that relapse cycle. if we can take their hand, I see you. I notice you're experiencing. It looks to me like you're feeling. Let me give you some vocabulary words for what this looks like. And then they may tell you, no, that's not what I'm feeling. I'm feeling this. Well, that's beautiful, because now they just gave you the insight that you need to help them, and that they need so that they can sit in it for a moment. And we just sit there and we feel it. We don't say a word. We don't put a time limit on it. We don't ask them if they're done yet, because it takes the time it takes. And you're going to do it as often as it takes. And so as we minister to those that are in this space, we help them through that emotional abyss and coming to a place of being a loss manager. And that is how we recover, and that is how we break that cycle of relapse that is bargaining. And that's how we help them say that they've returned to honor. And that's what I want all of us to be able to say, so that we can come back into the presence of our Savior, the one who has taken and borne all of this for us already. And we lay our burdens at his feet, in the feet of the cross. And we yoke ourselves with him so that we can move forward. I hope that this makes sense. And if you need additional, please reach out. The email is in the description. I look forward to any correspondence, any help I can give you. And I'm going to put a link in the comments to a document that you can download that will hopefully help you understand this more. Take care, everybody, and I hope that if it was beneficial, you've liked, you've subscribed, share the content to somebody that you know could benefit from it, so that we can all say that we have recovered from this life and returned to honor.